The mop froze in my hands. Gerald, that was his name. I remembered it from the very first day he brought his wife in and walked past me, whistling something upbeat, almost festive. And before we continue, friends, write in the comments what city you're watching from and what you're doing right now. It's always interesting to see how far our stories travel. His expensive shoes left wet marks on the freshly washed linoleum, but he didn't even notice. He was smiling like he'd just won the lottery. And behind the door of that hospital room lay a woman the doctors were giving, at most, a week to live. I shuddered. In my 3 years working at this hospital, I'd seen a lot. But such open, almost indecent joy on the face of a man whose wife was dying, that was too much. I wrung out the mop and was about to move on down the hallway when I heard a soft tapping sound. I turned around. Margaret, that very patient from room 11, was tapping her knuckles against the nightstand. She was looking at me through the half-open door and motioning me inside. I left the bucket and went in. The room smelled of medicine and faintly of expensive perfume. Even here, on a hospital bed, Margaret somehow managed to look well put together. Her gray hair was neatly styled. On the nightstand sat a small mirror and a tube of high-end face cream. I'd noticed that on the very first day I mopped the floor in here. "Close the door, girl," she said, and her voice was unexpectedly firm for someone who looked like a shadow of herself. I closed it. "What's your name?" "Anna. Anna Mitchell, according to the paperwork." "Anna," she repeated, as if tasting my name. "Sit down, Anna. Right here, on the chair. I need to tell you something, and I don't have much time. 3 days at most. The doctors think I don't know, but I do." I sat down, even though we're not supposed to linger in patients' rooms. Head nurse Deborah would have my head for this. But something in this woman's eyes made me forget about the rules. "Did you see him?" She nodded toward the door. "Did you see my husband?" I nodded. "He's glowing, isn't he? Shining like a brand new coin. He can't wait 3 more days. 40 years together, and he can't wait 3 days." I stayed silent. What could I say? He thinks he's getting everything. The apartment downtown, the country house, the bank accounts. We never had kids, just his nephew, Wade, a real piece of work. I'm sure they're already rearranging the furniture in my apartment in their heads. Margaret fell silent and closed her eyes. I thought she drifted off. It happens with very sick patients, they fade out mid-sentence. But no. She was just gathering her strength. "I've been watching you for a month, Anna. You're the only one here who talks to me like I'm a person, not like I'm already dead. You mop the floors and hum to yourself. You think I don't hear you. You have a nice voice. And kind eyes. Your hands so worn from work, but beautiful. Are you married?" I shook my head. I was. He left 2 years ago. For another woman. Kids? A daughter. Polly. She's 5. "And how do you live?" I shrugged. "How do we live?" "Like everyone else. We rent a room in an old building. My paycheck lasts from one payday to the next, sometimes it doesn't. Polly goes to a public daycare. I pick her up in the evening, feed her, put her to bed, and in the morning it's the same again: mop, bucket, bleach, endless hallways and rooms." "I can see it's not easy," Margaret said, as if reading my thoughts. "Listen to me carefully, Anna. I've lived my life. Lived it well, no reason to complain. But the last few years next to him," she nodded toward the door again, "have been like prison. He's been waiting for my death for at least 10 years. Rejoiced at every illness. And I just wouldn't die, out of spite. Now, looks like I finally decided to." She smirked, and there was so much bitterness in that smirk my nose started to sting. "So here's the thing, Anna. A week ago, I called the notary. In secret, while Gerald went off to the country house to grill steaks with that woman of his. Doesn't matter. I called him and changed my will. Everything I have, the apartment, the country house, the accounts, it's all yours now. I thought I'd misheard. Or that the medication had made her confused. That happens. Margaret. Be quiet and listen. There's no time. The apartment is a 3-bedroom in downtown Manhattan, in an old building. The country house, 5 acres of land, solid house. Gerald let it go a bit, but with some work it'll be beautiful. There's not a lot of money in the accounts, but enough to get you through at first, until you figure things out. All the documents are with the notary. Here's his card. She pulled a small rectangular piece of cardstock from under her pillow. Archibald Cohen. Honest man. Reliable. Call him later, you know what to do. He'll explain everything. I stared at the business card in my hands, unable to believe it. Was this a joke? The delirium of a dying woman? You're mistaken. You barely know me. I've watched you for a month. Every day. That's enough to understand a person. You're good, Anna. You have a small daughter, and you need to live. And my dear husband ruined my life for 40 years. That's enough for him. Let him see what it's like when everything gets taken away. But he'll fight it. Courts, lawyers. Let him try. The will is airtight. Archibald knows his job. And besides, I have cancer, but I'm of sound mind and clear memory. There's a medical evaluation, a psychiatrist's statement confirming I'm competent. Everything is covered, girl. I wasn't born yesterday. She leaned back into the pillow, and I could see how exhausted this conversation had made her. But her eyes weren't shining with sickness. There was something else there, almost playful. It'll be hard at first, she said more quietly. He'll hate you. He'll threaten you, scare you, maybe even sue. But hold on. You're strong, I can see that. And one more thing, in the apartment, in my study, there's a safe. The code is our wedding date backwards. He'll never guess it. He never remembered the date anyway. June 15th, 1972. So the code is 270651. Will you remember? I nodded, even though my head was spinning. There's something inside for you. Papers you might need if Gerald really goes too far. Leverage. She said that word almost with pleasure. On his entire rotten family. Use it wisely. Margaret, I can't accept this. You can. It's my gift. My last one. I don't need anything from you, just one promise. What promise? Live well. Raise your daughter. Be happy. And sometimes remember me with a kind word. That's all. She closed her eyes, and this time she really did fall asleep. I sat there for another minute, looking at her worn face, her thin hands with veins under paper-thin skin. Then I quietly stood up and left, clutching the notary's card in my fist. I walked home instead of taking the bus, even though I usually rode to save money. Every dollar mattered. But today I needed to think, and you can't think on a crowded bus. Store windows drifted past, evening lights were already on, the air smelled like fall and roasted coffee. Somewhere nearby, a street food stand had opened. I walked and tried to process what had happened. An apartment downtown. A country house. Money in the bank. It was so far from my reality it felt like fiction. I made $1,500 a month. I rented a corner of a room in an old building for $1,000. Polly went to a public daycare where the teachers changed every month and lunch was slimy oatmeal. I dressed her in thrift store clothes and myself too. I couldn't remember the last time I bought anything new. My phone was old, with a cracked screen. I still wore a winter coat my mom gave me 10 years ago, back when I was in college. And today someone had offered me an apartment. Just like that. For mopping floors and humming to myself. Madness. Complete madness. But the business card in my pocket was real thick cardstock, gold lettering, a phone number. I picked Polly up from daycare last. The aides were already giving me disapproving looks. My daughter ran up to me, banging her knees on every doorway like she always did. She was small and fast, like a sparrow. Chestnut hair perpetually messy, freckles on her nose, and so much happiness in her eyes just from seeing me that my heart clenched every time. Mom. Mom. Today Billy wet himself, and Miss Baker yelled, and then Lucy fell off the swing, and then we drew pictures. Look. She shoved a crumpled piece of paper with something colorful on it into my hands. I squatted down, hugged her, breathed in her familiar smell: kids shampoo, sweet cookies, a hint of modeling clay. Beautiful drawing. Who is it? That's you and me. And a house. We're going to have our own house, Mom. I froze. Kids sometimes say things that give you chills. Why do you think that? I dreamed it. That we have a big house, and a cat, and flowers in pots. And my own room. Pink. Of course we will, I said, even though until today I hadn't believed it for a second. Of course we will. We walked home through the courtyard, and Polly chattered nonstop about Billy misbehaving, about the yucky oatmeal, about the teacher reading them Cinderella. Mom, did Cinderella really live in a palace afterward? Yes. And can we too? I squeezed her little hand in mine. We'll see. Our room greeted us with its usual dimness. 200 square feet for the two of us. A couch that folded out at night. A crib Polly had almost outgrown. A wardrobe with peeling veneer. A table, 2 chairs, a hot plate in the corner hidden by a plastic curtain. And one window facing a blank wall of the neighboring building. The neighbors were tolerable Mrs. Sherman, an 80-year-old deaf woman who was always frying fish, and Mr. Thompson, a quiet alcoholic with sad eyes. He never caused trouble, just cried in the kitchen at night sometimes, and I could hear his muffled sobs through the wall. I reheated yesterday's soup for Polly, picked at my own food without appetite. Put her to bed. She fell asleep instantly, clutching an old plush bunny, a gift from my ex-husband. The only thing he'd left us, along with bitter memories. Then I sat by the window, staring at the black wall outside, and took out the business card. Archibald Cohen. Notary. Next to the phone number was an address. I knew the area. It was 2 stops from the hospital. I'll call tomorrow. Or not. Or yes. My head was buzzing, my thoughts tangled. I lay down next to Polly and pressed myself against her warm side. She sniffled in her sleep and moved closer. Behind the wall, Mrs. Sherman clattered dishes, and the smell of fried fish filled the air. In the morning, I did call. The voice on the line was calm, a bit dry. Cohen speaking. Hello, my name is Anna Mitchell. Margaret gave me your card. I hesitated, realizing I didn't know her last name. Margaret Ermond, he prompted. Yes. I was expecting your call. She warned me you might reach out. When would it be convenient for you to come by? We set it for 2 o'clock. I couldn't come earlier. I had to arrange childcare for Polly. Mrs. Sherman agreed to watch her in exchange for a chocolate bar. She liked Polly, even though she barely heard her endless chatter. The notary's office was in an old building on the 3rd floor. It smelled of paper and something official. Archibald Cohen turned out to be an elderly man with a neat beard and attentive eyes behind his glasses. He studied me for a long moment, as if weighing something, then nodded to his own thoughts. So you're Anna. Margaret spoke of you often. By phone, of course. She was already in the hospital when we finalized the documents. I don't understand, I said honestly. She barely knows me. Why me? He took off his glasses, wiped them with a handkerchief, and put them back on. You know, Anna, I've been a notary for 32 years. I've seen everything. People leave their estates to dogs, cats, charities that don't exist. One woman left her porcelain collection to a museum that's been closed for 50 years. Another gentleman, you won't believe it, left everything to his reflection in the mirror. We had to declare it invalid, but he insisted. I couldn't help but smile. So, he continued, Margaret is one of the most clear-minded clients I've ever had. She explained her decision very precisely. She said, I don't want the man who tormented me for 40 years to get a single dollar. And I want the person who was kind to me when I was dying to have a chance at a good life. Those were her words, not mine. But his relatives. His husband. They'll come after it. They will, he agreed. Absolutely. Gerald is persistent and, how shall I put it, tight-fisted. He won't back down easily. But the will is flawless. There's a medical assessment of competence, witnesses, a video recording of the signing. I accounted for every possible challenge. Of course, no one can give a 100% guarantee, but I'd put your chances at about 90%. 90%? Is that a lot or a little, when we're talking about an apartment probably worth $2 million? What do I need to do? For now, nothing. Wait. After Margaret passes, you'll formally enter the inheritance in 6 months. That's the law. During that time, anyone who feels wronged can file a claim. But you'll be able to move into the apartment earlier. I'll prepare the documents." He opened a folder on the desk and pulled out several papers. "Here's a copy of the will. Here's my power of attorney to handle matters on your behalf. Here are the contacts of a lawyer. If needed, his services have already been paid for by Margaret from her own funds, so you don't need to worry. And this," he handed me a sealed envelope, "she asked me to give to you personally." On the envelope, written in handwriting hers, of course, but strangely similar to mine, were the words, "Anna. Open after." I slipped the envelope into my bag. My hands were trembling slightly. 3 days later, the hospital called me. It was head nurse Deborah. Her voice sounded odd, half sympathetic, half curious. "Mitchell, there's an issue. The patient from room 11. Ermond. She passed during the night. You should come in. Her husband is asking who was on duty these past few days." I went cold. "Why?" "I don't know. He's angry, yelling at everyone. The chief said all staff who had contact with the patient need to be present." I got ready like I was heading to an execution. I left Polly with Mrs. Sherman. Again, she was used to it by now and didn't even ask questions. The hospital was unusually quiet, though mornings were normally full of bustle, rounds, procedures. Several people were standing outside room 11, Chief of Medicine Dr. Stevens, Deborah, Nurse Kathy, and for some reason, a security guard from the first floor. And Gerald. He saw me and immediately lunged forward, like he'd been waiting specifically for me. "There she is," he jabbed a finger at me. "The janitor. She was here all the time, I saw her. She did something to my wife." "Gerald, calm down," Dr. Stevens held his hands up, as if shielding himself. "We'll sort this out." "What's there to sort out?" She whispered with her, I saw it. "My wife was fine until this dash," he couldn't find the word. "She turned her against me." I stood still, not moving. Looked at him, his flushed face, hands shaking with rage, the expensive suit that now looked somehow ridiculous. "I didn't do anything wrong," I said evenly. "I cleaned floors. That's my job." "And the will," he almost shrieked. "Was that your job too? You think I wouldn't find out? She left everything to me, and then suddenly bam, some janitor. This is a forgery. Fraud. I'll take this to court." Dr. Stevens looked at me with new interest. Deborah opened her mouth, then closed it. Kathy stared wide-eyed. "The will was Margaret's personal decision," I said. "She was of sound mind. That's documented. If you want to sue, sue. That's your right." I don't know where those words came from. Probably from fear. When you're truly scared, sometimes you become calm, like stone. My mom taught me that when someone yells, speak quietly. The quieter you speak, the more people listen. "Dr. Stevens," Gerald turned to the chief. "I demand an internal investigation. This woman abused her position to manipulate my wife. That's a crime." "Gerald," Dr. Stevens looked exhausted. "The hospital doesn't handle inheritance matters. That's outside our authority. If you have complaints, take them to the police or the courts. Our job is to treat patients. Your wife was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. We did everything possible to ease her final days. Please accept our condolences." Condolences. I remembered him walking down the hallway, whistling. 3 days ago. When she was still alive. What condolences did he deserve? "I won't let this go," Gerald hissed and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. After he left, Dr. Stevens looked at me. Not judgmental, more thoughtful. "Mitchell, is it true? About the will?" "It is, Dr. Stevens." He paused. "Well, I'm not your judge. Margaret was a complicated woman, but a smart one. If she made that choice, she had her reasons." Deborah snorted but stayed silent. Kathy looked at me with a mix of awe and envy. I could see it in her eyes. A janitor who got an apartment. From rags to riches. A fairy tale. But it wasn't a fairy tale. The next few months were a nightmare. Gerald kept his word. He filed a lawsuit challenging the will. Then another. Then a police report. Then a complaint to the district attorney. He wrote to every possible authority, accusing me of fraud, document forgery, pressuring a terminally ill person, practically murder. Archibald Cohen, the notary, had been right. The documents were airtight. The police closed the case after 2 weeks. We won the first court hearing. Then the second. The prosecutor refused to proceed. But he wore me down thoroughly. Every police summons meant taking time off work. Every court date meant nerves, sleepless nights, fear. Polly sensed something was wrong with me. She became clingy, slept poorly. I lost 10 pounds, though I wasn't heavy to begin with. Dark circles settled under my eyes that no cream could hide. And then there were the letters. He sent them to my workplace, official ones, from lawyers. Then unofficial ones, from himself. Threats, insults, demands to return what I'd stolen. Once he cornered me outside the hospital and grabbed my arm. "You'll regret this," he hissed in my face, reeking of expensive cologne and something sour, sickly. "I'll drag you through the courts. You won't be able to work. You'll rot in your shack, and your daughter will rot too. I'll ruin your life." I yanked my arm free and walked away without looking back. At home, I sobbed into my pillow so Polly wouldn't hear. I wanted to give up, call the notary, say take it back, I don't need anything, let them choke on it. But then I remembered Margaret's eyes. And her words, live well. Raise your daughter. That's what she wanted. She did this on purpose so he'd get nothing. And if I gave up, then it was all for nothing. Then he'd won. 3 months after her death, I received a letter from the notary. The deadline to contest the will had expired. All claims were dismissed. I officially entered the inheritance. The apartment, the country house, and the bank accounts were mine. I reread the letter at least 10 times, not believing my eyes. Then I called a cab. The first time in my life I called a cab not because I was late or carrying something heavy, and went to the address. The apartment was in an old building on Park Avenue. High ceilings, ornate molding, wide windowsills. 3 rooms, a living room, a bedroom, and a study. A kitchen big enough to live in. And the windows huge, floor to ceiling, facing the street. I walked through the rooms like I was dreaming. Touched dusty furniture, opened closets. Her things were still there: clothes, books, dishes. Photographs on the walls. Margaret when she was young. Next to her, a young Gerald. Smiling, holding hands. Who could have imagined that couple would turn into what I'd seen in the hospital? In the study, there was a safe, small, built into the wall behind a painting. I entered the code, 270651. Their wedding date, reversed. The safe opened. Inside were documents. Lots of documents. I took the first folder, opened it, and whistled softly. Bank statements. In Gerald's name. Transfers of large sums to offshore accounts. Contracts for selling property that clearly belonged to the family but had been sold without his wife's knowledge. And photographs. Gerald with a woman, young, blonde. On a beach, in a restaurant, in some apartment. Intimate photos that made me uncomfortable, though he clearly hadn't been. On the back of one was a date. 15 years ago. And Margaret had still been healthy then. She knew. She'd known for 15 years and had been collecting evidence. And now she'd handed it to me. I sat down on the floor right there in the study, among the dusty folders, and stared out the window for a long time. The sky was gray, New York gray, familiar. The city roared beyond the glass. And I thought about a woman who spent 40 years with a man who didn't love her. Who collected proof of his betrayal the way others collect stamps or postcards. Who waited for the moment to strike and struck after death. Was it cruel? Probably. But it was fair. The move took a week. I quit the hospital. Deborah looked at me like I'd spat in her face, but said nothing. I packed my things. There turned out to be laughably little. 2 suitcases for Polly and me. Everything else, furniture, dishes, linen, stayed in the old place. Mrs. Sherman cried when we left. Even Mr. Thompson came out of his room, sober and sad. "Good luck, Anna," he said hoarsely. "You're a good person. Don't forget us." I promised I wouldn't. And I came back later, brought groceries, helped with repairs. But that was later. Back then, I was just driving toward a new life. In the cab, Polly pressed her face to the window, staring at the city. Mom, is it true we're going to have our own home now? It's true. And my own room? Your own. Pink? We'll paint it. She squealed with delight so loudly the driver jumped and almost drifted into oncoming traffic. And I looked at her and thought it was worth surviving all those months for this. The apartment greeted us with silence and dust. For a week, I cleaned, scrubbed, threw things out, bought new ones. The money in the accounts wasn't enormous, about $100,000, but to me it was an eternity. I'd never seen sums like that in my life. We painted Polly's room pink, hired workers. First time in my life I hired someone to do work I could have done myself. But I was exhausted. So exhausted I just wanted to lie there and stare at the ceiling. A therapist, yes, I went to a therapist, also for the first time in my life said it was normal. After prolonged stress, the body demands rest. That I needed to give myself time. I did. For almost a month, I did almost nothing. Just took care of Polly, walked around the city, read books from Margaret's library. She loved classics, Fitzgerald, Steinbeck, Hemingway. And for some reason, Agatha Christie mysteries. All the books were marked in the margins, with bookmarks, underlined passages. I read them and felt like I could hear her voice. A month and a half later, Archibald Cohen called. Anna, could you come by? There's something important. I went the same day. He looked concerned, wiped his glasses more often than usual, drummed his fingers on the desk. Gerald filed another lawsuit. Again? I thought it was over. I thought he'd accepted it. Yes, but this time it's more interesting. He's demanding the will be declared invalid on the grounds that you and Margaret conspired to steal this property. Conspired? I knew her for a month. I know. But we'll have to prove that. He hired a serious attorney, the kind who can turn a fly into an elephant. It'll be a long process. I sat there, feeling the exhaustion crash over me. Again. How much more? There's something else. Archibald hesitated. I received a call. An offer. To step aside. A lot of money, Anna. A very large amount. Step aside how? Admit that the will was executed with violations. That I made a mistake. Then it would be annulled, and everything would go to the legal heir. And you? Refused, of course. He looked at me over his glasses. I've been a notary for 32 years, and my reputation is worth more than any money. But you need to understand he won't stop. This man is used to getting what he wants. And I'm used to surviving, I said, surprised at how firm my voice sounded. Let him try. He tried. The next 3 months turned into an endless war. Courts, hearings, witness interrogations. Gerald found people who claimed they'd seen Margaret and me together in cafes, parks, on the street. The photos were blurry, vague, you could see anyone in them. Our lawyer, the same one Margaret had paid for, shredded that evidence completely. Alibis, witnesses, security camera footage, he dug into everything. I learned a lot about the legal system. About how lawyers work. About what the phrase procedural violations really means. I learned to read legal documents and spot where someone was trying to trick me. And I also learned that Gerald wasn't just a greedy man chasing an inheritance. He was scared. Truly scared. Because in the safe Margaret had opened, there were more than photos of a mistress. There were documents about his shady deals, gray schemes, tax evasion, funneling money overseas. He was afraid I'd use it against him. And he was right, because that's exactly what I intended to do. The lawyer, his name was Paul, young but very sharp, studied the papers from the safe for a long time. Then he took off his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and looked at me with respect. Margaret was a very smart woman. I know. This is enough to put him away. At least 5 years. Large-scale tax fraud. I don't need him in prison. Paul raised an eyebrow. Then what do you need? For him to leave me alone. Forever. We drafted a letter. official, written in legal language, but the message was simple. If he didn't stop the harassment and withdraw the lawsuit, copies of the documents would be sent to the tax authorities and investigators. The response came a week later. The lawsuit was withdrawn. A single letter, and signed, lay in my mailbox. You won. But that doesn't mean I'll forget. I crumpled the letter and threw it away. I didn't care what he remembered. What mattered was that he could no longer hurt me. A year passed. A strange, difficult, amazing year. Polly started school, a good private one I could never have dreamed of before. She made friends, teachers praised her diligence. The pink room filled up with toys, books, drawings on the walls. I found a job not as a janitor, no. I joined a small nonprofit organization. We helped elderly people, the lonely, those who had no one to bring them a glass of water. The pay wasn't much, but it was enough. My apartment was my own, utilities were covered, and I didn't need more. And at the country house, the very one Margaret left me, I started renovations. Gerald had really let it go. The roof leaked, the walls needed paint, the garden was overgrown with weeds. But the house itself was solid, well built. I hired workers, then started helping myself, painting, digging, planting flowers. It was unexpectedly pleasant. My hands ached after work, but it was a good ache, not the one that came from endless mopping in the hospital. The neighbor at the country house, Veronica, looked at me with suspicion at first. She knew Margaret, was friends with her. And the sudden appearance of a young woman who became the owner, it was strange, it raised questions. But then we started talking. I told her everything, not all at once, gradually, over tea with jam, to the sound of crickets on a summer evening. She listened, shook her head, sighed. Maggie always had a backbone, she finally said. I remember how she and Gerald started. He was fire back then, a spark. Then he changed. Made money, got important. And she kept enduring. I told her, leave him, Maggie. She just smiled. Now I get why. She was waiting. Waiting a long time. For what? For her moment. She was always like that, knew how to wait. And when she struck, it was precise. Veronica looked at me, and there was something warm in her eyes, almost maternal. She'd be proud of you, girl. You didn't break. That's what matters. That fall, I met Andrew. It happened simply, without romantic storms or lightning. He worked at the same nonprofit, drove a truck, delivered food and medicine. Tall, a little awkward, kind eyes, perpetually messy hair. We started by just talking during lunch breaks. He told me about his life, divorced 5 years earlier, no kids, lived alone in a small apartment on the outskirts. It just didn't work, he said without much sadness. She wanted something else. A career, money, all that. And me, what kind of career does a driver have? A wheel and a road. He wasn't complaining, just stating facts. There was something disarming about that, no bitterness, a calm acceptance of what is. He met Polly by chance. I was picking her up from school, and Andrew happened to be nearby, dropping off documents next door. She looked at him, he looked at her. Who are you? My daughter asked with the bluntness only kids have. Andrew. And you? Polly. Your hair is funny. I know. It doesn't listen. Mine neither. They stood there, two tousled people, big and small, seriously discussing unruly hair. I watched them and felt something warm spreading in my chest. Not love yet, it was too early. But something like hope. Like possibility. Our relationship grew slowly, as if we were both afraid to scare something fragile away. Lunches turned into walks after work, walks into evenings with movies and pizza, Polly included by default. She accepted him immediately, kids sense people well. She called him Uncle Andrew and dragged him around to show her drawings, toys, books. He examined everything patiently, commented, praised, not play acting, but genuinely, as if her watercolor scribbles were masterpieces. You need a family, Veronica said once, when I was at the country house helping with apples. Maybe. Not maybe. You do. Being alone is hard, Anna. Even if you have money. A person needs another person. And if it's like before? Like with Mark? Mark was my ex-husband, the one who left when Polly was 3. Packed up and left, saying he couldn't handle it and deserved more. Veronica snorted. Your Mark was a jerk, sorry to say. Anyone could see that from a mile away. This one isn't a jerk. He's decent. Rare these days, but it happens. You're grown now, Anna. You've learned to tell the difference. Trust yourself. By New Year's, Andrew was practically living with us. Unofficially, he came in the evenings, left in the mornings, but a toothbrush appeared in the bathroom, slippers in the hallway, his sweater on the chair. Polly was thrilled there was someone to read bedtime stories when I was tired, to pull her on a sled and build snowmen in the yard, to call her princess and pretend he believed her stories about fairies and unicorns. And me, I was calm. Not happy yet. Happiness takes time to relax, to stop expecting a trap. But calm, for the first time in years. The following spring, Andrew proposed. Without much romance, we were just walking in the park. Polly ran ahead to feed ducks, and he suddenly stopped and said, Listen, I've been thinking. Maybe we should make this official? I laughed from surprise, from the awkward phrasing, from the way my heart jumped. Is that a proposal? Yeah. I didn't buy a ring, money's tight. But I will, if you say yes. Are you serious? He looked at me, and there was something in his eyes that made me want to cry out from grief, from something else entirely. I'm serious, Anna. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. And Polly. I want to be yours. For good. I said yes. Polly, hearing the news, squealed so loudly the ducks scattered and passers-by turned around. She jumped around us, demanding we call Andrew Dad right now, immediately, this very second. We had the wedding in the summer, at the country house. Small, quiet. Veronica and her husband were there, a few colleagues, Mrs. Sherman from the old building. We brought her by taxi, and she cried all evening, repeating, You waited, you waited. Mr. Thompson even came sober, in a suit, with a bouquet of asters from some front garden. He hovered awkwardly by the gate, unsure whether to come in, until I dragged him inside myself. You look beautiful, Anna, he said, and suddenly sniffled. Your late mother would be proud. My mom died when I was 22. Suddenly, of a heart attack. I'd just married Mark and thought life had worked out. I didn't get to say goodbye, didn't get to say anything. Now I sometimes talk to her in my head, tell her how things are, what's new. Probably silly. But it helps. After the wedding, life settled into a good, peaceful, almost boring routine. Andrew moved in officially. Polly started calling him Dad, at first shyly, then with confidence. He arranged guardianship, then adoption. My ex-husband Mark didn't object. He even signed the papers with relief, as if shedding a burden. Probably that's what it was to him. Work, school, weekends at the country house. Evenings with books and tea. Nights with Andrew quiet, warm, as if that's how it was meant to be. I learned not to expect traps. Not to flinch at the doorbell. Not to check pockets and phones. He was who he seemed, simple, kind, reliable. Rare, as Veronica said. But I got lucky. Polly was 7 when she first asked about her real dad. It was at night, before bed. Andrew was on the road. He'd become a long-haul driver. The pay was better, though he was away a lot. We lay in her bed. I was reading Mary Poppins, when she suddenly said, Mom, was the dad from before bad? I set the book aside. Why do you ask? Kids at school say some people have a real dad and a not real one. And the real one is the one who made you. I made you. Yeah. But the dad, what kind is he? She got confused. The dad? I thought for a long time about how to explain it. Then I said, the dad from before wasn't bad. He just wasn't ours. Do you understand? Some people are ours, and some aren't. He turned out not to be ours, and he left. But Dad Andrew is ours. The realest kind there is. How is he not ours? Imagine you choose a toy. You look at it, it's pretty, shiny. You take it home. Then it turns out it breaks, or it's uncomfortable, or you just don't like it. That doesn't mean the toy is bad. It just means it's not yours. And Dad Andrew won't break? She asked so seriously my heart clenched. No, sweetheart. He won't. Polly thought, then nodded. Okay. Because I love him. And I love you. And I don't want you to break. I hugged her, buried my nose in her hair. Kids shampoo, warm skin, soft breathing. My little person, who will have a better life than I did. That same fall, Archibald Cohen called. His voice was strange, solemn, and a little sad at the same time. Anna, could you come by? There's news. The news was unexpected. Gerald had died. A heart attack. They found him in his apartment 3 days later. He lived alone after losing everything. The woman from the photos, the mistress, had left him long ago when the money ran out. The nephew Wade, whom he'd counted on so much, had vanished from his life as well. He died alone, unwanted. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because it matters. Because you should know it's over. Completely. There will be no more lawsuits, no more threats. You can live in peace. I rode the subway home thinking about him. About Gerald. About a man who spent 40 years with a woman he didn't love. Cheated on her. Waited for her death. And in the end, died himself earlier than she expected, but still alone, still unhappy. Margaret seemed to know. As if she foresaw it. Or maybe it's just that evil doesn't go unpunished. Sooner or later, life puts everything in its place. I got off at my station, rode the escalator up. Outside, a fine rain was falling, the air smelled like fall and wet leaves. By the building stood Andrew. He'd come back early from a run. Polly was bouncing beside him in yellow rain boots, measuring every puddle. Mom, she shouted when she saw me. We've been waiting. Dad said we're baking a pie. I'm mixing it myself. What kind of pie? Apple. With cinnamon. I'll help, Andrew said, and looked at me. There was a question in his eyes. What happened? Why that look? I shook my head. I'll tell you later. Not now. Now it's pie, cinnamon, my daughter's squeals, and his hand in mine. Now it's the life given to me by a woman I knew for only a month. And whom I will remember all my life. The envelope Archibald Cohen gave me at the very beginning of this story, I opened it only 2 years later. It lay sealed in a desk drawer, and I kept putting it off. I was afraid, probably, that it would contain something that would spoil the memories. Conditions, demands, reproaches. But one evening, Polly was asleep, Andrew was on the road, I sat alone in the kitchen with a cup of tea and my hands reached for the envelope on their own. Inside was a letter. 1 page, written in an even, beautiful hand. Anna, if you're reading this, some time has passed. That means you made it. I knew you would. You and I are alike. I was once a hospital aide myself, in another hospital, another city. I washed floors and dreamed of something more. Then I met Gerald and it seemed like happiness at last. Wealthy, handsome, attentive. Then the attention ended, then the respect, then everything else. Only appearances remained. 40 years in a beautiful prison. I'm not complaining. I chose that prison myself and stayed in it, though I could have left. Why didn't I leave? I thought about that for a long time. Probably because I was afraid. To start over, to be alone, to be poor. Silly, right? To fear poverty when you're unhappy in wealth. But that's how people are. We cling to what we have, even if it's killing us. You're not like that. I saw it in your eyes. You're not afraid to start over. You're not afraid to be poor. You live for real, not pretending. That's why I give you what I couldn't use myself. The apartment, the country house, the money, these are just things. But they can give freedom. The freedom I never had. Use them, Anna. Live. Love. Raise your daughter. And sometimes remember me not with sadness, but with a smile. Because my life wasn't lived in vain. It was needed so that you could have yours. Yours, Margaret. I sat in the kitchen, tears dripping onto the paper, blurring the ink. Outside, the city roared, ads flickered. Somewhere far away, an ambulance siren wailed. Life went on big, loud, indifferent. But in my small kitchen, in my small life, there was warmth. There was a home. There was a daughter. There was a husband who would soon come back from the road and bring me that silly brooch from a roadside shop I once mentioned in passing. There was work I loved. There were friends, neighbors, colleagues. There was an entire universe that began with one exhausted hospital aide mopping a corridor floor and humming to herself. Thank you, Margaret. I will live. I promise. 3 more years passed. Polly grew up, stretched out, turned from a little sparrow into a slender teenage girl. Her personality was something else. Sometimes it felt like she did everything out of pure defiance. But that's normal, the child psychologist said. That's the age. The transition. The main thing is to love and not push. Andrew and I tried. He turned out to be a surprisingly patient father. Even when Polly slammed doors and yelled, "You don't understand me," he never raised his voice. He waited until she calmed down, then went to talk to her. I don't know how he managed it. Probably because he himself grew up without a father and knew what it felt like when there was no one nearby who would listen. I left my job at the nonprofit and started my own business. A small agency matching caregivers and helpers with elderly people. The idea came naturally after I spent about 2 years volunteering and saw how many lonely seniors needed help and how many people were willing to give that help but didn't know how to find each other. Archibald Cohen helped with the paperwork. Veronica became my first client when her husband was bedridden after a stroke. Then came referrals. Word of mouth did its job. Within a year, I had 12 caregivers on staff and an office mall and a basement of a residential building, but mine. After 2 years, 40 employees and a proper space. I barely spent the money Margaret left me on myself. I invested it in the business, in Polly's education, in renovating the country house. We lived modestly by the standards of our neighborhood, even poorly. But it was enough for me. Because true wealth isn't measured in money. One summer, Polly was already 13, and we went to the country house as a family. Andrew took vacation, I closed the office for a week, and Polly got permission to leave the camp where she worked as a junior counselor. It was hot, the air smelled of cut grass and apples. Neighbor Veronica had moved in with her daughter in the city a year earlier. Her house stood empty, but we kept an eye on the property so it wouldn't overgrow. That evening, after Polly went to visit a friend in the neighboring village, Andrew and I sat on the porch watching the sunset. The sky was pink and gold, like something out of an impressionist painting. Crickets chirped in the grass, a dog barked somewhere far away. And Andrew said, Are you happy?" I thought about it. A strange question after so many years together. But I understood what he meant. Yes. I am. I am too. He took my hand, big, calloused, warm. The hand of a man who works with his hands and isn't ashamed of it. You know, I sometimes think, what if you hadn't? Well, if none of this had happened. The inheritance, all that. Would we have met? I don't know. Maybe yes. Maybe no. I think no. You'd still be working at the hospital. I'd still be driving my routes. We'd pass by each other and never notice. So what? So that I'm grateful to her. That woman. Margaret. Not for the money, I don't care about money. For giving you a chance. And me along with you. I leaned against his shoulder. The sunset faded behind the trees, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Somewhere up there were my mom. And Margaret. And everyone we loved and lost. I was sure they were watching us and smiling. Because we made it. Because we're alive. Because we're happy. The next morning, Polly ran in with news. A new resident had appeared in the village. Bought a house at the other end of the street, started renovations, brought in a bunch of workers. Young and handsome, she babbled. Nice car. And a dog. A husky. Andrew smirked at me. Here we go. Dad, come on. I'm just curious. At your age, everything's interesting, he ruffled her hair. Especially handsome guys with huskies. She snorted, but blushed. The new neighbor turned out not to be that young, 35, maybe 40. A businessman from New York who wanted quiet and nature. His name was Christopher. He was polite, reserved, with tired eyes of someone who works a lot and sleeps little. He and Andrew quickly bonded. They both liked working with their hands, tinkering with engines, fixing broken things. He looked at my daughter like a child indulgently, a bit distracted. She sighed and drew his dog in her notebook. First love awkward, funny, doomed. I remembered myself at her age and didn't laugh. I just stayed close. That same summer, something else happened. A woman arrived. Young, blonde, with a tired face and 2 suitcases. She was looking for work, anything at all as long as there was a place to stay and at least some pay. The neighbors shook their heads. An outsider. Strange, where did she come from? But I recognized myself in her. The woman who 10 years earlier mopped hospital floors and didn't know how to make it to the next paycheck. Her name was Helen. She was 28. Her husband left, her mother-in-law took the child, she lost the court case, was evicted from the apartment. A classic story, thousands like it. I just need to get back on my feet, she said, looking at the floor. I know how to work. I'm not lazy. I'm just not needed by anyone. I took her in first to the country house, helping with chores. Then into the agency, as a coordinator. She turned out to be capable, learned fast, picked things up instantly. 6 months later she was handling half our clients and doing it better than I did. Why are you doing this? She asked one day. Helping me when you don't have to. Because once, someone helped me too. When I was at the bottom. A stranger gave me a chance. Now it's my turn. She looked at me, and there was something in her eyes, understanding, maybe. Gratitude. Or hope. I'll pay it back. Not to me. Someday, to someone else. Someone who'll need it the way you do now. She nodded. And I knew she would. The chain wouldn't break. Polly turned 16. She grew into a beautiful girl, chestnut hair, my freckles, Andrew's kind eyes. The personality stayed complicated, but I'd made peace with it. That age. Those hormones. That's life. She wanted to be a doctor, not an aide like I once was, but a real doctor, a surgeon. I'll save people, she said seriously. And I believed her. She had stubbornness to spare. By then my agency had grown so much that I had to hire a director. Helen, yes, the same Helen with the 2 suitcases, handled it perfectly. I stepped back from daily operations and did what I loved, volunteering, helping people like I once was. We had enough money. I lived simply, spent little, saved. The downtown apartment, the one for Margaret, was still our home. I didn't change much, just updated the furniture and repainted the walls. The photos stayed. Young Margaret looked out from them, mysterious, a little sad. Polly once asked who it was. I told her everything. The whole story from the beginning. She listened with her mouth open, the way kids listen to fairy tales. Then she said, Mom, it's like a movie. Only real. Real. And she chose you? Just like that? Just like that. Polly was quiet for a long time, staring at the photo. Then she said, I want that too someday. To help someone. For real. The year Polly turned 18, she got into medical school. Tuition covered. First try. No tutors, no bribes. Just persistence, sleepless nights, piles of textbooks. I was so proud I wanted to cry. Andrew too, he didn't really cry, but his eyes suspiciously shone when she showed us the acceptance letter. We celebrated at the country house barbecue, string lights, laughter until morning. Neighbors came, friends, Helen with her new husband who, by the way, turned out to be that same Christopher with the husky. Life loves surprises like that. Polly danced barefoot in the grass, and I watched her grown, beautiful, happy, and thought, this is it. This is what it was all for. This is why I mopped those floors, endured those humiliations, cried into my pillow, was afraid and kept going anyway. For this moment. For this girl. For this life. I was 42 when I received another letter. Not from a notary, from a stranger. She wrote that she'd read about me in an article somewhere, found my contact info, and decided to write. Her name was Tamara. She was 73. And she was dying. Cancer, like Margaret once. She had no heirs, no children, no grandchildren. Only a husband who was waiting for her death, like Gerald once did. I read your story and recognized myself. I endured 40 years too. I was afraid to leave too. I collected evidence too. I just had no one to give it to until I read about you. I want to do the same. I want to find someone I can help. Can you tell me how? I read the letter 3 times. Then I called her. We talked for 2 hours about life, pain, hope. She cried. I cried too. Then I gave her Archibald Cohen's number. He was very old by then, barely working, but for something like this, he agreed to help. 3 months later, Tamara died. Her heir was a young woman named Claire. 23, an orphan, a supermarket cashier, living in a dorm. Now she had a home. And a chance. The chain didn't break. Andrew turned 50. We celebrated at a restaurant for the first time ever, a real expensive one, with white tablecloths and an incomprehensible menu. He felt awkward in a suit, kept adjusting his tie, grumbling that a barbecue at the country house would have been better. But his eyes shone when Polly gave him his gift, an album with photos of our whole life together. She'd been putting it together for 6 months, secretly. It had everything: our wedding, the country house, first day of school, Christmas trees, summer vacations, birthdays. The 3 of us. Smiling, sunburned, tired, happy. Different. And the same. A family. I'm getting old, Andrew said, flipping through the album. We all are. You're not. You're exactly the same as the first day. You're lying. A little. But nicely. I laughed. He did too. Polly looked at us with that expression I love, tenderness mixed with teasing. You're so cute when you're not fighting, she said. We never fight, Andrew objected. Dad, you yelled for an hour yesterday about where to put the Christmas tree. That was a constructive discussion. We laughed again. And it was probably the best evening of my life. One of 1,000 best ones. Polly graduated from university with honors. Got into residency. Fell in love with a classmate, a quiet guy with smart eyes who looked at her the way Andrew once looked at me. They married a year later modestly, at City Hall, no big celebration. Better to spend the money on travel, my daughter said. And they went on a 3-week honeymoon to Italy, which she'd dreamed of since childhood. I became a grandmother at 51. They named the baby Andrew, after his grandfather. A tiny, red, screaming bundle placed in my arms at the hospital. I held him and cried. From happiness, from exhaustion, from knowing life goes on, that the chain doesn't break, that nothing was in vain. Andrew didn't make it to 60. A heart attack, fast, sudden, merciless. He drove to the country house in the morning, wanted to fix the porch. In the evening the neighbors called. They found him in the garden, under the apple tree, tools still in his hands. The ambulance didn't make it. I don't remember how I got through the first days. Polly came and took care of everything: funeral, paperwork, people. Little Andy crawled around the apartment, not understanding why Grandma was crying, trying to make her laugh. Sometimes it worked. There were many people at the funeral: friends, colleagues, neighbors. Helen and Christopher. Claire, the same girl from the tiny apartment on the outskirts, now married and expecting a child. Mrs. Sherman, she was over 90 by then, but she came, leaning on a cane, sat in the front row, whispering something soundlessly. Even Veronica sent a wreath. She no longer left the house, but she remembered. Everyone remembered. Because Andrew was the kind of person people remember. Simple. Kind. Reliable. Never raised his voice. Could fix anything. Loved me for 20 years and never regretted it once. I buried him in the cemetery near the country house, under the apple trees he'd planted himself. Every week I went there, sat beside him, talked. Told him about our grandson, about our daughter, about work. About how much I missed him. About not knowing how to live without him. But I did know. He would want me to live. Not to give up. To be as happy as possible without him. 5 years passed. I was still living in that apartment on Park Avenue. I was still working, not for money, but for meaning. Helping people. Finding those who were struggling and giving them a chance. The chain that Margaret had started kept growing. By then, dozens of people had received help from those who had once been helped themselves. A cycle of kindness, as I called it. No loud words. Just the truth. My grandson Andy was growing up, learning, making his grandmother laugh with his antics. Polly became a surgeon, the very thing she had dreamed of. She saved people every day, just like she'd wanted. And me, I was simply living. Waking up in the morning, drinking coffee by the window, looking out at the city. Going to work, or to see my grandson, or just walking the streets. In the evenings, I read books, the same ones Margaret once read. I made notes in the margins. I talked to Andrew in my head. Sometimes I cried. More often, I smiled. On the day I turned 60, Polly arranged a surprise. She gathered everyone, friends, acquaintances, people I had once helped. About 50 people crammed into the apartment. It was loud, joyful, a little chaotic. Little Andy, no longer little, 10 years old, with his dad's smart eyes, handed me a homemade card. Happy birthday, Grandma. You're the best. I looked at all these people, my daughter, my grandson, my friends, Helen and Christopher, Claire with her 2 kids, all those whose lives had somehow intertwined with mine, and I thought, this is my life. This is what came out of that janitor who, 25 years ago, was mopping floors in a hospital corridor, who was given a chance by another woman, a stranger. Because she believed. Because she saw something. Because she wanted kindness to continue. I stepped out onto the balcony and breathed in the evening air. New York roared below, blinking with lights, living its endless life. Behind me, guests laughed, glasses clinked. Somewhere out there, among the stars, were those I loved and lost: my mom, Andrew, Margaret. They were watching me. I knew they were satisfied. Thank you, I whispered to the sky. Thank you for everything. The wind stirred my hair. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn sounded. Polly called out to me from the living room. Mom, come here. Kate. I smiled, wiped my tears, and went back to my people. To life. To happiness. A few months later, I found a letter in my mailbox. No return address, just my name on the envelope. Inside was a short note. You helped my mother 20 years ago. She has passed away now, but before she died, she asked me to give you this. She said you would understand. Attached was a photograph. Old, faded. A young woman in a white uniform. A hospital aide. Standing in a hospital corridor with a mop in her hands. Smiling. On the back, a date, 1975. And a signature, Meg. Margaret. Young. Before marriage. Before everything. Just like I once was. A hospital aide dreaming of a better life. I looked at the photo for a long time. Then I hung it on the wall next to the others. Next to Andrew, next to Polly, next to my grandson. Next to my family. Now she was part of that family too. Forever. I was mopping the floor in the corridor when the glowing husband of a critically ill patient walked out of her room. A minute later, she quietly called me in and told me she had 3 days left to live. And then she added a sentence after which I understood that my days as a hospital aide were numbered. She said, "Girl, I want to give you a chance. You deserve it." And I took it. I didn't waste it. And I passed it on. That's how life works. That's how kindness works. It doesn't end. It continues. Again and again. In each of us. But I got ahead of myself. Let me go back to those days when it all was just beginning. To those first weeks in the new apartment, when I still couldn't believe it was happening to me. I remember the first time I was alone in those walls. Polly was at daycare. I had taken the day off work. I was still working at the hospital then, hadn't quit yet. I stood in the middle of the living room, afraid to move. The high ceilings pressed down on me. The molding felt foreign, almost hostile. The parquet floor creaked so loudly under my feet that I wanted to walk on tiptoe. I sat down on the old couch. It smelled of dust and something sweet perfume, probably, and I burst into tears. Not from happiness. From fear. From not understanding how to live in a space that wasn't made for me. I grew up in a small apartment in the Bronx, where you could touch the ceiling with your hand. Then a college dorm, a room for 4. Then a rented studio with Mark. then a corner in an old house. I didn't know what to do with 3 rooms. Where to put all that space? How to fill that emptiness? That evening, I called my mom's friend, Aunt Joyce. She lived in Connecticut. We didn't see each other much after my mom died, but we talked sometimes. I told her everything about Margaret, the inheritance, my fears. She was quiet for a long time, then said, "Anna, you're an idiot." I was offended. Why? Because you're crying over being lucky. Do you know how many people dream of that kind of luck? And you're sitting there scared. What are you scared of? I don't know. That I won't manage. That they'll take it all away. That I don't deserve it. Deserve it, don't deserve it, Aunt Joyce snorted. That's not for you to decide. You were given something, take it. And stop whining. Your mother, God rest her soul, whined all the time too, and then regretted wasting time on it. Live, Anna. Just live. The rest will follow. She was right. I didn't realize it right away. It took weeks, months, but she was right. Life doesn't ask whether you deserve something. Sometimes it just gives you something good. The first months in the new apartment were strange. I was learning how to live differently. Learning not to save on food, to buy decent groceries instead of the cheapest ones. Learning to turn on the heat when it was cold instead of wrapping myself in 3 sweaters. Learning to buy Polly new clothes instead of altering old ones. It probably sounds funny. Obvious to some people. But for me, each of those small things was a tiny victory. A small proof that life had changed. Polly adapted faster. Kids are flexible, they accept new things easily, without too many questions. For her, it was just a new apartment, a new room, new toys. She ran through the corridor, hid in closets, made up stories about ghosts living behind the ceiling molding. "Mom, did a princess live here before?" she asked. "Why a princess?" "Because it's pretty. Like a palace." I didn't tell her about Margaret then. Not at 5. I just said, yes, a very good woman lived here. And she wanted us to live here after her. Did she die? Yes. Like Grandma. Like Grandma. Polly thought for a second, then nodded. Then I'll draw her pictures. I drew for Grandma, and I'll draw for her too. So she won't be sad there. My throat tightened. I hugged her, pressed my face into the top of her head. Draw, sweetheart. Make sure you draw. The neighbors in the building were all different. An old building on Park Avenue is its own world. Old New Yorkers who remembered other times lived there. New money types who bought apartments to renovate and rent short-term. Strange, lonely people no one really knew. There were 3 apartments on our floor. In one lived an elderly couple, Mr. Victor and Mrs. Nina. He was a former engineer, she a former teacher. They'd lived there since the 60s, remembered all the tenants, knew all the stories. They knew Margaret too and treated me cautiously. I felt their looks when I stepped into the hallway. Heard whispers behind doors. I knew what they were thinking. A scammer. A gold digger who wormed her way into a dying woman's trust. Mrs. Nina gave in first. She caught me by the elevator when I was coming back from the store with Polly. "You're that Anna?" she asked bluntly. "Yes." "Margaret really left you everything?" "Yes." She studied me for a long time. Then looked at Polly, who was hugging a bag of mandarins to her chest. "Pretty girl. Looks like you." "Thank you." Margaret wanted children. All her life. Gerald wouldn't let her, said it was too early, later, let's wait. Well, they waited. She sighed. "Come by for tea sometime. Tell me how you met. I'm curious." I went a week later. Without Polly, she was at daycare. Mrs. Nina served tea in a porcelain set, fed me homemade jam, and listened to my story for 3 hours. She didn't interrupt, just nodded and sometimes sighed. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I'm glad she did it. Gerald deserved it. I watched him torment her for 40 years. He didn't hit her, no, he wasn't that type. Worse. He humiliated her. Quietly, nastily, constantly. In front of guests he'd say she was stupid. or cooked badly, or had gained weight. She smiled, endured, then came to me and cried. I told her leave him. And she said, where would I go? Everything's his, everything's in his name. I'll leave with nothing. So she endured. Why didn't she divorce earlier? When she was young? Love. Mrs. Nina shrugged. Stupid, right? But it happens. You love someone who isn't worth it and wait for them to change. And they never do. I told her about Mark. About how I waited for him to change, to become responsible, caring, grown up. He didn't. Left for another woman, probably waiting there too for him to change. He won't. You're a good woman, Anna, Mrs. Nina said as I was leaving. Margaret didn't make a mistake. Live happily. For her too. Mr. Victor thought later. He was the kind of man who distrusted women by default, considered us all calculating, dangerous. But one winter day his door lock broke while Mrs. Nina was visiting their daughter. He stood in the hallway, confused, not knowing what to do. I called the locksmith, made Mr. Victor tea while he worked, and didn't take any money for the call. We're neighbors, I said simply. He looked at me with new eyes. After that, he always greeted me first, sometimes brought Polly candy, and on March 8th gave me a sprig of mimosa. A small thing, but from him, almost a feat. The third apartment on the floor stood empty. Some businessmen bought it to renovate and abandoned it. Workers came sometimes, drilled, then disappeared for months. Then came back. That renovation seemed to last forever. I didn't quit the hospital right away. For 2 more months, I went out of habit, mopped floors, endured Deborah and her jabs. She couldn't accept that a janitor had inherited property. It contradicted her entire worldview, where everyone should know their place. So, Mitchell hasn't moved into the mansion yet, she sneered. I have, Deborah. And what, still mopping floors? Conscience finally kicked in? It's a job, Deborah. I haven't quit yet. Then quit. What are you waiting for? Afraid they'll take it away? I stayed silent. I didn't want to explain that I needed time. That I couldn't just drop my old life and jump into a new one. That I was scared. But one ordinary, unremarkable day, I understood it was enough. It happened in the surgical ward corridor. I was mopping the floor, as always, when I saw a woman. Young, about 30, with an exhausted face. She sat on a bench and cried. Quietly, almost soundlessly, only her shoulders shaking. I stopped beside her. Are you okay? She looked up. Red, swollen eyes. My husband. An accident. Doctors say it's 50-50. He'll make it. How do you know? I don't. But I believe it. There are good doctors here. She sniffled. I don't know what to do. If he dies. We have kids. 2. I don't work, I stay home with them. How will I? I sat next to her and hugged her. A stranger I'd seen for the first time in my life. She buried her face in my shoulder and sobbed out loud. Doctors, nurses, patients passed by. No one stopped. Everyone's used to tears in hospitals. I sat with her for half an hour. Then they called her husband had come to after surgery. She ran off without even saying goodbye. But at the end of the corridor, she turned, looked at me, and smiled through tears. That day, I wrote my resignation. Not because I no longer wanted to mop floors, but because I understood I could do more. I could help people for real. And for that, I didn't need a mop. The first months without work were strange. I wasn't used to staying home. I wasn't used to having free time. I didn't know what to do with myself. Polly was at daycare until evening, and I wandered around the apartment like a ghost. I rearranged furniture. Washed windows that were already clean. Cooked food we didn't have time to eat. Read Margaret's bookshelves packed all the way to the ceiling. Then I started going out into the city. Walking the streets, stopping by cafes, sitting on park benches. Watching people. Thinking about my life. About what it had been and what it had become. About what I wanted it to be next. On one of those walks, I wandered into a church. Not on purpose, I was just passing by, saw the door open, and went in. Inside it was quiet, smelling of incense and wax. Candles burned in front of icons. An old woman in a headscarf whispered something by the crucifix. I wasn't religious. My mom sometimes went to church, but she never made me go. Mark laughed at religion, called it opium for old ladies. I never thought about it seriously. I didn't believe, didn't disbelieve. There just wasn't space for those questions in my life. But that day, I lit a candle. For my mom. For Margaret. For myself and Polly. And for the man from the hospital, the husband of that crying woman. I don't know if he survived. I hope he did. When I left the church, I sat down on a bench in the courtyard. It was October. Leaves rustled underfoot, the air smelled of smoke, someone was burning brush somewhere. And suddenly it hit me. Not grief, no. Something else. Understanding, maybe. The realization that I was alive. That I had a daughter, a home, a future. That I had been given a chance not everyone gets. And that I had no right to waste it. A week later, I enrolled in courses. Accounting first, then management. Then first aid classes. Then something else, I don't even remember what anymore. I wanted to learn. I wanted to become someone more than a janitor. Not for money, we had enough for now. For myself. So I could look in the mirror and see a person, not a shadow. I enrolled Polly in a good daycare, a private one, with a speech therapist, a psychologist, a pool. At first she was scared, new kids, new teachers. But a month later she was already running the whole group like a little general. She had my character, stubborn. And a bit like my mom's too, she could put people in their place with just a look. In the evenings we sat in the kitchen, big, bright, with a window facing the street. I cooked dinner, Polly drew or molded things out of clay. We talked. About her day, about mine, about all kinds of silly things. She told me about a boy named Timmy who pulled her pigtails, and about a girl named Madison who was mean but pretty. I listened, nodded, sometimes laughed. And I thought, this is happiness. Not big, not loud. Small, domestic, warm. The kind that's made of evenings like this. Of conversations about nothing. Of the smell of fried potatoes and children's laughter. The kind worth fighting for. Gerald didn't leave me alone for a long time. Even after the trials ended, even after the documents with the dirt forced him to back off, he didn't disappear from my life completely. He sent letters no longer threatening, more pitiful. He wrote that I had ruined his life. That I had taken what rightfully belonged to him. That he was sick, lonely, that no one needed him. At first I tore the letters up without reading them. Then I started reading them. Not out of pity, out of curiosity. I wanted to understand what kind of person he was. What was going on in his head? The picture that emerged was a sad one. He grew up in a family where money was the main value. A merchant father, a housewife mother who counted every penny. He was taught that love was a transaction, that women were an accessory to property, that only people with money deserved respect. He married Margaret because her parents owned an apartment downtown. Did he ever love her? Maybe at the very beginning. Until he realized she was a person, not a thing. That she had her own opinions, her own desires, her own will. That's when the problems began. I don't justify him. He caused her a lot of pain, too much. But sometimes, reading his pathetic letters, I felt something like compassion. Not for him, for the boy he once was. For the child who was never taught how to love. Once, about 6 months before his death, he waited for me outside my building. Not aggressively. He just stood there, hunched over, aged. I didn't recognize him at first, he had changed so much. "Can we talk?" he asked in a hoarse voice. I wanted to walk past. But something stopped me. Maybe his eyes, there was no anger left in them, only exhaustion. Endless, dull exhaustion. 5 minutes, I said. We sat down on a bench in the courtyard. He was silent for a long time, crumpling some piece of paper in his hands. Then he spoke. I didn't mean to. I did, but... He got tangled up. I don't know why I came. I just wanted to see. You. The apartment. To understand why she did it. Because you didn't love her. I did. He flinched. In my own way, but I did. 40 years together. Being together for 40 years doesn't mean loving. You cheated on her. Humiliated her. Waited for her to die. He shrank as if struck. She told you? And not just her. We fell silent. A woman with a stroller passed by. A dog barked somewhere. An ordinary spring evening. I know I was a bad husband, he said finally. I know. But I didn't think. I didn't think she would. He didn't finish. I thought she'd forgive me. She always forgave me. She didn't forgive you. She waited. He looked at me, and there was something strange in his eyes. Not hatred. Not anger. Almost respect. You're right. She waited. Maggie was smart. Smarter than me. I only understand that now. He stood up, lingered for a moment, looking at the windows of our apartment. Then he turned and walked away. I never saw him again. 6 months later he died. Alone, in an empty apartment he rented somewhere on the outskirts. Everything he had left was burned up in court fees, lawyers, and attempts to reclaim the inheritance. Irony of fate, he was so afraid of ending up without money that's exactly what happened. Aunt Joyce came to visit a year after I moved. She looked at the apartment, at Polly, at me, and burst into tears. Your mother would be proud, she said, wiping her eyes. I know she would. She always said my Anna is stubborn, just like me. She'll get what she wants. I didn't get it, Aunt Joyce. It was given to me. Nonsense. Anything can be given. What matters is what you do with it. And you're living. Raising your daughter. You didn't break when they tried to break you. That's what getting it means. Our first kiss happened on New Year's. We were decorating the tree at our place. Andrew somehow brought a real one, huge, smelling of pine. Polly squealed with delight and hung ornaments, randomly stars next to balls, cones next to angels. It was funny, loud, truly festive. Then she fell asleep, tired from running around all day. We were left alone in the kitchen, drinking tea with mandarins, watching snow fall outside. Anna, he said. I turned, and he kissed me. Quietly, carefully, as if afraid to scare something away. His lips were warm, his chin a little rough, he hadn't shaved. He smelled of pine and mandarins. I'm sorry, he said, pulling back. I shouldn't have. I pulled him back and kissed him myself. Long, real. Like I don't think I'd ever kissed in my life. I should, I said afterward. Very much so. He laughed softly, happily. Hugged me, and we stood there by the window while snow covered the city and the tree blinked with colored lights in the living room. The wedding was in the summer, like I already told you. Small, homey, at the country house. No lavish dresses or expensive restaurants. Just people who loved us, barbecue, string lights, music from an old boombox. Polly was the flower girl and was very proud of it. She wore a pink dress, the one we picked out together, and solemnly carried the rings on a pillow. Andrew looked at me like I was the most beautiful woman in the world. And I looked at him and thought, this is my person. The one I'd been waiting for without knowing it. The one worth surviving everything that came before him. Mrs. Nina, our neighbor, cried all evening. Mr. Victor shook Andrew's hand and said something about a real man. Aunt Joyce came again, brought her famous apple pie, and didn't let go of me for half an hour. Your mother is watching you from above, she whispered. And she's happy. I know she is. Life after the wedding became different. Not better or worse, just different. There was rhythm, routine. Andrew got up early, a trucker's habit. Later he switched to long-haul routes, they paid more. I made breakfast, woke Polly, took her to school. Then work, then home, homework, dinner, bedtime. An ordinary life, like millions of others. But for me, it was special. Because for the first time in my life, I felt at home. Not in an apartment, in a family. Andrew often left for several days, sometimes for a week. I missed him terribly, to the point where my chest ached. But I knew he would come back. and that knowledge that there was someone who would always come back mattered more than his constant presence. He called every evening. Told me about the road, about the cities he passed through, about funny people at gas stations. Polly would grab the phone, chatter about school, about her friends, about the cat we got to saying Charlie who had grown into a huge black beast with an attitude. I listened to their conversations and smiled. This is what happiness looks like, I thought. Not fireworks and champagne. Just an evening phone call. Just the voice of someone who loves you. Polly grew up. Changed. Turned from a funny little sparrow into a teenager, with all that comes with it, slamming doors, being mad at the whole world, endless "you don't understand me." I endured it. I remembered myself at her age. I was unbearable too. Poor Mom must have gone gray from my antics. Andrew handled it better than I did. He had this natural calm about him. He could listen to any meltdown without raising his voice, and then say something that made Polly go quiet and start thinking. "You have a right to be angry," he told her. "But think about who you're angry at. At us? We love you. At yourself? For what? At the world? It won't get better because you're angry. So why waste your energy?" She would snort, go to her room, and an hour later come out subdued, almost guilty. "Dad, I'm sorry. There's nothing to apologize for. Come here." But then, slowly, little by little, it got easier. Not better, easier. I learned to wake up without him beside me. Learned to cook for one. Learned to talk to him in my head when it got too hard. He answered. I heard his voice as clearly as if he were there. "Don't cry, Anna. Live. You know how." I did. I had to learn all over again. My grandson Andy became my greatest joy. He looked like his grandpa, the same kind, open face, a little awkward. Loved cars like his grandpa. Loved fixing everything like his grandpa. Looked at me with the same eyes, warm, reliable. "Grandma, don't be sad," he'd say, climbing into my lap. "Grandpa's in heaven. He sees us. And he's happy when we're not sad." How do kids know these things? No one teaches them. They just know. As if they're born with that knowledge, and then, as they grow up, they forget. Polly became a surgeon, just like she dreamed. Worked at a good clinic, did a lot of surgeries. Came home to her husband and son and collapsed from exhaustion. But she was happy. I could see that. And that mattered. Her husband, Michael, the same quiet guy from college, turned out to be a good man. Not loud, not flashy, but reliable. Like Andrew once was. They loved each other simply, calmly, like adults. Without drama or scandals. Without cheating or betrayal. The way it should be. I turned 60. Then 65. Then 67. And now I'm sitting by the window, looking at the evening city, writing these lines. I don't know why. Maybe so I won't forget. Maybe so someone someday will read this and understand life is worth living. Even when it hurts. Even when it's scary. Even when it feels like there's no way out. Outside the window is New York, huge, noisy, eternal. Somewhere down there, people are walking. Rushing to their business, thinking their thoughts. Among them, maybe, there's a woman like me. A hospital aide, a cleaner, anyone. Tired, lonely, having lost hope. And maybe someone will reach out to her. Give her a chance. Believe in her. I believe. I believe in people. I believe in kindness. I believe the chain Margaret started will never break. Because that's how kindness works. It doesn't disappear. It's passed on from person to person, from heart to heart. And one day it comes back, when you least expect it. I was mopping the floor in the corridor when the glowing husband of a critically ill patient walked out of the room. A minute later, she quietly called me in and said she had 3 days left to live. And then she added a sentence after which I understood that my days as a hospital aide were numbered. She said, "Girl, I want to give you a chance." And she did. And I passed it on. And I will keep passing it on for as long as I live. Because that's what life is. Not money. Not apartments. Not success. People. Love. Kindness. Everything else will follow.